Before we get into the stories, make sure you check out Donovan Dread Discovers, where I go over strange and weird videos from around the world. I release several times a week. Also, sign up for the weekly email at dreadsarmy.com so you don't miss any updates. I thought I'd share a story that's been weighing on me for some time. My wife, Teresa, and I took a vacation to Death Valley National Park a couple of years ago. You know, the infamous hottest place on Earth that stretches out for miles with its barren yet strangely alluring landscapes. I can still remember it clearly, how the sun was glistening on the cracked desert floor, and the rocky ridges appeared like the bones of the earth. You see, Teresa and I aren't really the resort type. We always loved the thrill of charting the unexplored and testing our limits. When you're in the heart of a landscape such as Death Valley, it strikes you how insignificant we really are, how wild this world can be. There was something liberating in it, stepping away from the steel and cement world we were used to. We set out every morning for a new trail. The sight of the wind-sculpted sand dunes, salt flats, and crumpled rock formations were mesmerizing. We'd paused often, not due to exhaustion, but for photographs. Each frame was unique, each click of the camera capturing a snippet of an ancient world untouched by mankind. The temperature difference between night and day out there is rather drastic. The desert was a furnace in the daylight, and it turned into a freezer after sundown. We'd settle in our tent, tucking into our sleeping bags and listening to the silence around us, broken only by the occasional gust of wind. It was an incredible feeling except for one particular night. Normally, everything would go calm and quiet with darkness falling on the desert. But that night, the stillness was interrupted, broken by something strange, something out of place. Thinking back, it wasn't something we heard, at least not in the traditional sense. It was a feeling, an unseen vibration in the air. Teresa felt it too, her grip tightening on my arm. We peeked outside our tent but couldn't see much. The moon was shrouded behind ominous clouds casting long, eerie shadows in the night. I put it down to some nocturnal animal roaming around. Something was out there watching us. Whatever it was intelligent enough to keep out of sight. I waited for the hidden creature to move on, but my sudden sense of unease turned quickly into dread. I can't remember feeling that level of fear before, not in any of our wilderness adventures. I felt cornered, targeted by an unexplainable terror. It's strange how the feeling of being watched is perhaps the most basic and primal feeling that taps into our built-in flight or fight response. It makes your hair stand on the end and your skin tingle. You feel naked and vulnerable. I can't tell you how badly I wanted to get out of there, but we had nowhere to go for safety. Hunkered down in our tent, we listened for anything out of the ordinary. There was a rustling sound, a shifting of rocks, a scratching on the surface, but nothing definite. Any animal could have made those noises, but I just knew we were dealing with something dangerous. I can't tell you how I knew. I just knew. Maybe it's some sort of sixth sense that's meant to keep us safe. I don't know. Like how prey animals know there is a predator in the area. That's how I felt that night. I am not a believer in cryptids or strange creatures. I always saw myself as a man of science. Yet, that night in the heart of Death Valley, I wasn't so sure about my convictions. The intensity of these feelings, impressions, and sensations seemed to indicate otherwise. There was something unnatural in the desert that night. Now you might be wondering how this all ended. Well, it didn't, not really. Just before dawn, I noticed something unclear moving out of the corner of my eye. I don't know how to describe it really. It seemed to be a blend of the shadows. I strained my eyes but couldn't pinpoint it. An indefinite shape that seemed to loom over us, casting an even larger and darker shadow on our tent. In terror, I noticed Teresa squeezing my hand, mirroring my fear. We waited, breath held, eyes wide. Our hearts pounded in our ears, and my throat felt as dry as the desert itself. And then, all of a sudden, it stood right next to the entrance of our tent, breaking the stillness with a low growl. It was close enough now to see its silhouette. It was almost human-like in nature, but was oddly elongated and oversized for a man. I couldn't properly distinguish any features. just an outline. Our encounter ended abruptly as suddenly as it appeared. The being vanished, just retreated into the shadows of the night. A calm fell over the desert once more, as though nothing had happened. We were left there, in our tent, eyes wide and hearts pounding. Questions formed in our minds, preventing sleep from returning. We whispered quietly, in the aftermath, both of us trying to convince the other it was probably just a coyote or a desert animal we weren't accustomed to. Deep down, though, we both knew that we weren't speaking the truth. The next day dawned warm and bright, an unnerving contrast to the ominous night we shared. I examined our campsite, the looming rocks around our tent, anything that could hint towards the strange occurrence from the night before. I discovered some peculiar footprints around our tent. They were large and strangely shaped, unlike anything I've ever seen. At least, anything I'd ever seen in the wild. I had seen footprints like them once before, only they were in a museum, in an exhibit about dinosaurs. Now, I'm not saying there are living dinosaurs running around the desert, but something is out there, and it has tracks that are eerily similar to creatures of a long-forgotten past. The remainder of our vacation was suffused with unease and restlessness. We were constantly on edge, never quite able to forget the terrible dark figure in the moonlight. Hastening our packed lunches and avoiding the night, we decided to leave earlier than we planned. As we packed our stuff and set out on our drive home, I found myself casting nervous glances behind us, where the ominous rocky terrain of the Death Valley stretched out, an endless expanse haunted by shadows and mysteries that are better left unsolved. I am still left with 1,000 questions and no answers. How could these things still exist in our world today? How have they managed to remain hidden for so long? Your guess is as good as mine. You know, I've always loved horseback riding. There's something special about the way a horse moves beneath you, obediently responding to your commands while retaining its own sense of individuality. It's a mutual agreement of respect and trust. Every chance I got, I would saddle up and ride the trails around Bangor, Maine, my home for the past few years. One evening, I decided to take a leisurely ride around my favorite trail. It was probably late November. We'd been riding for about an hour when Bella started acting twitchy. Now, Belle was as steady as they come. I'd ridden her in thunderstorms without so much as a flinch, so to see her this nervous was cause for concern. I tried to soothe her, running my hand down her neck and whispering reassurances, but she wouldn't calm down. Despite my initial instinct to turn back, an unexplainable drive prompted me to push forward. The path ahead was shadowed, the setting sun making the once familiar trail seem alien. I dismissed Bella's nervous whinnying to a distant coyote's howl, or some unseen deer merely startled by our presence. As we continued deeper into the woods, a musty, damp smell filled my nostrils. It was heavy in the air. The surrounding area was eerily silent now. Suddenly, I heard a loud noise that made me nearly fall off Belle. It was a strange sound, something between a yelp and a growl, a sound I had never heard in these woods before, not in all my years of riding. The echo reverberated through the woods, bouncing off the trees, causing Belle to shy nervously. The effect was immediate. A primal fear began to stir deep within me, and I felt all the small hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. Something was off. I began to notice odd things. Footprints that were way too large to belong to any animal I knew, tree branches snapping around us, and an eerie feeling of being watched. Yet, in the midst of fear and the uncertain dread that hung in the air, my curiosity got the better of me. Cautiously, I urged Bella onward, my senses now fully alerted, desperately trying to rationalize the unexplainable sights and sounds that lay before us. Just as we were about to turn a bend, a hulking figure stepped into the middle of the path. A look of disbelief filled my face as I tried to comprehend what my eyes were seeing. This was no ordinary animal. Its dark, coarse hair was somewhat like a bear's, though my mind kept pulling me back to a single strange word: Sasquatch. This thought sparked a chilled wave of fear to wash over me. The Sasquatch, if I may venture to call it that, stood a good distance off, but even from here, its staggering size was unmistakable. It towered over me, 6, maybe 7 feet tall, broad shoulders that would rival the world's strongest man. Its body was incredibly large and buff. The creature had a strange conical shape to its head, much like a cone, adding to its monstrous stature. I swallowed my fear, attempting to make sense of the moment, but the creature changed its stance, revealing piercing, beady eyes, an intense shade of black from what I could make out at this distance. Our eyes locked, and a jolt of adrenaline hit me, causing my heart to pound in my chest, as if holding a drumming contest with my thoughts. Belle whinnied in fear, stomping her hooves nervously on the ground, a mirror image of the fear I felt. Before I could even think to retreat, a low growl rumbled from the creature, raising the hair on my arms. I dug my heels into Bella's side, spinning her around, desperately urging her to gallop back the way we'd come, in a frantic bid to escape. As I rode away, I heard the crunching of leaves and breaking branches behind me, hinting at the beast stirring. A strange, loud whooping sound echoed in the silent forest, as if taunting me, following me long after the sight of it was lost. We burst out of the woods and into my compound, our appearance shocking my neighbors. After stabling Bella, I numbly stammered through my encounter with the creature to a few bewildered friends, their eyes wide with disbelief. My mind raced, the echo of the Sasquatch's growl resonating in my thoughts. The sight of its vast form, the stench that lingered, and that eerie whooping noise painted a chilling specter that refused to fade away. The days that followed were spent in anxiety, filled with intrusive thoughts about the encounter. I couldn't get myself to venture back to the trails. My haven turned horrific. The figure haunted my dreams. Those beady eyes seared into my nightmares. Reportedly, other locals and visitors around Bangor had begun to experience similar instances. Stories of brief sightings, inconceivable sounds, and that strange odor had me convinced that I wasn't alone, that our peaceful city was home to a Sasquatch, a creature that society had chalked up to folklore and wild imagination, was terrifying. This happened during my visit to our local national park here in Ohio, a few summers back. If you've never seen this park, it's just an unbelievable sight. You've got miles and miles of incredible views. Between the endless greenery, the astonishing diversity of colors, and the crispness of the atmosphere working its magic, it's like a splash of cool water right to the face. I'd started off just ambling around, taking in the sights and sounds of the woods. I even found myself following the trails left by critters scurrying about, but leaving faint trails. Everything about the place felt magical that day. The path led me to a small picnic area by the lake. The water had this inviting, cool blue look to it, reflecting the patches of the clouds that dotted the sky above. I sat there for only a moment before I noticed a musky odor in the air. It was faint but unmistakable, not entirely unpleasant, but odd enough to be noticeable. Around the same time, I started hearing faint whispers, like some weird echo bouncing off unseen walls. They're lost in the wind, barely there, but there nonetheless. It's hard to explain, but it's as if the wind itself was trying to speak. Mind you, as eerie as it sounds now, I hadn't really thought much of it at the time. I blame the whispers I was hearing on the fact that I had been in the sun a bit too long. Or perhaps it was just some hikers on another trail nearby. Brushing it off, I started to pack up my things and planned to get back on the trail when I saw something. To this day, I can't exactly put into words what I saw, but I remember clearly that it was a first-rate, spine-chilling, stop-dead-in-your-tracks kind of surprise. At the edge of the clearing, there was movement. I spotted a skinny, oddly shaped form, but it was just for a fleeting moment before it was swallowed by the forest shadows. It was tall, maybe around 6 feet or more, but it was the glowing eyes that shone from the creature that really stung my senses. Somehow, they were the most insane part of it. They shone bright gold in the failing evening light, staring right at me from the forest's edge. It stared at me in a way that was very unnerving, to say the least. This slender, grotesque silhouette almost seemed to be trying to connect to me. I still can't say for sure what it was. At first, it looked almost like a human figure, but I thought I saw antlers on it at some point. It was like a strange combination of things, like it was made up of multiple creatures. For a second, I doubted myself and thought that I was seeing things. I felt a cold apprehension creep up my spine. The question in my mind wasn't, what was it? It was rather, what did it want? As much as I tried, I couldn't bring myself back to normalcy. My heart pounded like a jackhammer in my chest as I squinted across the clearing at the place where I'd last seen the creature. After what felt like ages, I mustered enough courage to pack up my stuff and slowly began to retreat from the area. I could still feel its gaze on me, a feeling as chilling as winter's first bite. As I stumbled my way through the dense undergrowth, the park that had seemed inviting and tranquil just moments before suddenly felt alien and predatory. The rest of the way home was filled with paranoid glances over my shoulder and shivers down my spine at the slightest rustle of wind. By the time I had reached my car, I felt like a participant in one of those old-time horror movies, waiting for some monstrous abomination to reveal its terrifying form. That night, I tossed and turned in my bed, the memory of the glowing eyes, the peculiar sounds and smells, the growing collective of ominous signs. And throughout the night, I could still feel that icy gaze. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My encounter with the creature might not have been a face-to-face one, in the traditional sense. Those moments of fear in the park left a lasting mark on me. The eerie beauty of the park was forever tainted by chilling memories of that afternoon. The once inviting call of the wilderness now felt more like a foreboding omen. I've stayed away from the park since then. I'll be honest, I'm afraid that creature is still out there somewhere, and I don't want to take another chance with it. I got out the last time. I'm not so sure I would be as lucky if it met me again out there. I want to tell you a little about my encounter with a true anomaly that left me completely dumbfounded. This one happened at Big Bend National Park, one of my favorite places to get away when I need to escape the noise of the world. Big Bend is like nothing else you've ever seen. Mountains, deserts, rivers, canyons. It's got everything. To me, it feels like another planet, so isolated and tranquil. Anyhow, I was driving down from Fort Stockton, and I rock up to the park entrance, pay my fee, and head in. It was a little late in the day. The sun was setting, casting spectacular hues of orange, pink, and purple across the peaks and valleys. I had my camping gear and a week's worth of provisions in my truck, and I'd planned to rough it out in those desert flats, reconnect with myself, and enjoy the solitude. I remember it was the start of June, and the desert was in full bloom with cactuses flaunting their radiant flowers. The first day was uneventful. I set up my camp near the base of one of those monolithic rocks, took an easy trail, and reveled in the emptiness around me. On the second day, I took a longer trail up into the mountains. It was on the third day in the park that this encounter took place. I had planned to visit Santa Elena Canyon that day. Like all my mornings at Big Bend, I woke up early with the sun, fortified myself with a strong cup of coffee, packed up and headed out. Once I reached the canyon, I rented a kayak and drifted down the Rio Grande. After a few hours of uninterrupted paddling, I halted my journey to snack and hydrate alongside the riverbank. That's when I noticed it. There was something in my peripheral vision, an oddity against the backdrop of the natural landscape of the park. At first, I brushed it off as a trick of the light. The desert sun can mess with your eyes. But the object remained, moving amid the desert plants. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. It felt out of place, not something I'd expect to see on a typical day at Big Bend. I noticed then that I hadn't heard anything in a while. No insects, no birds, no wind, nothing. Now, if you've never been in a desert, it's hard to describe how quiet it can be. But this was different. It wasn't natural. Before I even had a chance to process it, this humming sound filled the air. It wasn't loud, but it was certainly there, deep and rumbling. At first, I thought it was a bug, or maybe some desert creature I wasn't familiar with. But as I looked up, The sight confirmed that I was wrong. Rising into the air, illuminated by the setting sun, was a craft of some kind. It was probably about 15, maybe 20 feet wide, and just hovered there in the air, with no apparent means of propulsion. It was saucer-shaped, like out of a 50s movie. The body of the craft was a sort of metallic silver color, and appeared to have a slight illumination around the edges. I don't know if I'd say it was a glow, but there was something in the air around it. Maybe it was some type of electrical field. I don't know. Red and blue lights of some sort circled the edge, spinning in a sequence too complex for me to follow. It was a sight to behold, and completely terrifying in its otherworldliness. I felt a tingling sensation running up my spine now, either fear or awe, possibly both. I was glued to the spot, jaw hanging open as this object defied every rule of aerodynamics I knew of. It didn't make any sense. One moment it'd hover stationary as though affixed in the sky, and the next, it'd move swiftly yet seamlessly, changing direction without easing its speed. The eeriest part, though, was the sound. It was a low hum, mechanical in nature, but too rhythmic to be random noise. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, zipping off into the horizon faster than anything I'd ever seen, leaving only the echo of its hum behind. I stood there for a moment longer, dumbfounded. The silence of the desert soon returned, but this time it was different. The quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, laden with a million unspoken words and unanswerable questions. In the days that followed, I tried to come to terms with what I'd seen. I'd never been one to believe in UFOs or little green men, but here I was, rethinking my skepticism. After a few futile attempts to convince some other campers about my encounter, and seeing their amused, disbelieving faces, I stopped. I knew what I saw, even if no one else did. My journey ended, but the awe and questions stayed with me. Every time I look up to the sky now, I'm left wondering what may be out there. Unknown, unexplored. I still visit Big Ben, not just for its earthly beauty, but for the possibility of another close encounter. I want to know what's out there. I would love to share something pretty wild that happened to me while hiking in Sedona, Arizona. I'm a guy who loves to get up before the sun and hit a trail. And you know, there's no better place to enjoy a sunrise hike than Sedona. There's something about walking among the red-tinged rocks, with the brisk morning air filling your lungs, that just puts me at ease. It's an entirely different world from my day-to-day life. One morning, I woke up extra early, around 4:30 a.m. I guess, and I decided to hike one of my favorite trails, the Broken Arrow Trail. It was still cool out. The summertime heat hadn't crept in yet, and the stars were shining bright like little diamonds on velvet. I decided to do the loop in reverse that day just for the fun of it. Where most folks hike for the exercise, I hike for the quiet. Hard to explain what I mean by that to people who haven't been bitten by the hiking bug. City noise, traffic noise, digital noise, it all takes its toll. But out there, it's just the wind and the quiet rustle of leaves, the occasional calls from unseen birds. For the first hour or so, everything was normal. The beginning of the trail was gentle, and the pre-dawn light made the rocks glow, this deep orange color that seemed almost ethereal. I took a break at Chicken Point. It was just me and my granola bar, watching the sky lighten up to the east. Normally, seeing the city coming to life as the sun rose was my favorite part of the hike. But that morning, I felt an underlying sense of awe I hadn't experienced before. After that, I continued on my way, keeping a comfortable pace and soaking in the beauty around me. I've always loved the rugged beauty of Sedona. Its stark, harsh landscape has a certain raw purity that makes you feel so small, yet so peaceful. I walked and walked, not really thinking about anything in particular, and lost in the moment. Deciding to detour a bit, I started off the beaten trail and into the wild. The only sounds I could hear were the faint crunch of gravel under my boots, the whispering of the wind and my own heartbeat. It was incredibly peaceful until something happened. That's when I heard it. The first sign that something was off was a low growl. It was a sound that set the hairs on the back of my neck on edge, something primal and full of menace. Being a seasoned hiker, I'm no stranger to encountering wildlife, but this was different. Something about this growl was unsettling, otherworldly even. My heart started pounding like a drum. I knew there was something there with me but hidden in the wilderness. Then everything went silent. The wind stopped, the bird calls ceased, and even my heart seemed to quiet down. There was a stillness, an intensity to the silence that seemed almost unnatural. Suddenly, I was acutely aware of everything. The musky smell of the desert, the rough texture of the rocks under my hands, the prickly warmth of the sun on my skin. My nose registered a pungent smell that was harsh and putrid. That's when I felt a wave of foreboding wash over me, chilling me to the bone. The next moments felt like something out of a nightmare. I heard a sound and turned to see a massive figure emerging from the shadows of the rocks. Initially, my brain tried to rationalize it. A bear, maybe? But as the figure stalked towards me, my rationality evaporated. The first thing I noticed was its height. It must have been 7 to 9 feet tall, hunched yet powerful. It had a dark brown mane of fur, like a cape draping over its massive shoulders. It was glistening in various shades of brown and black beneath the now brighter sun rays. The thing that struck me most was its face. It was grotesque and yet fascinating, like a train wreck you just can't look away from. It had a long snout, like a dog's, filled with 2 rows of massive sharp teeth that glinted, and a pair of pointy ears that twitched occasionally. The eyes were the final horrific touch. They were a piercing demonic red, radiating an unnatural and intelligent light. Behind those eyes, there seemed to be a chilling sentience, a predator sizing up his prey. As we locked gazes, the creature let out a growl. It was that same terrifying growl I had heard earlier. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs seemed to have turned to stone. It was as if I was paralyzed by my fear. But then, just as quickly as it appeared, the beast turned and dashed off, disappearing into the wilderness. After it was gone, I scrambled out of there as fast as my legs would take me. The calm serenity of my morning shattered entirely. My heart pounded in my chest till I thought it might burst. It took everything I had to not look back for fear that it might be following me. When I emerged onto the paved road, I felt a sense of relief that's impossible to describe. And yet my mind was buzzing with questions. What the hell did I encounter back there? Was it a trick of the light? My imagination? Deep down, I knew it was something else. My research later led me to stories of similar encounters, all describing a creature eerily similar to the one I'd come face to face with. I've been on countless hikes since that fateful morning, always hoping to catch a glimpse of the beast again to convince myself that I actually saw it. Yet, a huge part of me is relieved that I haven't encountered it again. The beauty of Sedona brings me back again and again, but there's always this lingering sense of dread buried within the anticipation. So here's what I've learned. The world out there is vast and strange, full of mysteries that are probably better off left alone. I'll keep hiking and keep exploring, but I'll never forget that morning, the sighting, the smell, and that creature. Indeed, the beauty of nature often comes with its own set of beasts.